I am going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today for our third in a series of deep dive Pathways to Prosperity Coalition webinars. This one focused on intermediaries. My name is Kyle Hartung. I'm an Associate Vice President here at Jobs for the Future. And with my colleague, Charlotte Cahill, we co-lead our national portfolio of education and career pathways building work. Broadly situated under the banner of Pathways to Prosperity. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a few words. I want to start, for those of you who are not familiar with JFF, we are a national nonprofit organization. We've been at this work for over 40 years with a laser-like focus on driving transformation in the United States education and workforce systems to achieve equitable economic advancement for all. And since 2012, so for going on nearly 13 years here, we have been leading this national body of work, the Pathways to Prosperity Initiative. And in that time, we've partnered with federal, state, and regional leaders in 32 states and over 150 regions across the country to support the design and the scaling of education and career pathways systems, focused on making sure that every young person has an opportunity to lean in and determine for themselves what their best possible future is and have access to the resources, tools, and opportunities they need to bring that to reality. And to do that, we work with partners across this ecosystem, stakeholders like yourselves who are here with us today, to design solutions and scale best practices, to advocate for and design policies and practices that we know work, and to invest in new solutions, all in the service of making a difference in the lived experience of youth, young adults, and adults, and for the communities and economies in which they live and work. Pathways to Prosperity is guided by a framework that really guides the focus of what our work is around these 5 core levers: secondary to post-secondary integration, career navigation systems, work-based learning, leadership and policy, and the focus of today's webinar, the work of intermediary organizations and intermediary functions in pathways systems. I want to just take a quick moment to situate how we think about intermediaries for the purposes of this conversation today. So this is not going to be a nuanced frame, but a high-level structure in terms of who are intermediaries, what do they do, and why do we think that they're important. At a very high level, I'll talk about the fact that when we think about the work and importance of intermediary organizations, it's really about the role they play in communities and regions and sometimes at state levels to really operationalize the needs of that community in which they're a part of. They really serve as the glue of these systems, really serving as a way to connect and network people across the ecosystem together who can be collaborative, who can come together to focus on the outcomes that will center the needs of individuals, shift burdens from individuals to those of the systems, and really focus on coordinated and systemic activity, and ultimately create the conditions where complementary motivations of all partners can be coordinated and people can develop common and shared goals, all in the service of young people and the worlds in which they are operating. And this work matters for a number of reasons. One of the ways that we frame this over time is to think about how do we build pathways so that they are really focused on the needs of the region. Courtney, if you can move to the next slide. Yeah, right. So if we think about the difference here is that we can think about a region that has pathways, and these are really one-off opportunities. They might be programs, they might be models, but really shifting toward a vision and the role that intermediaries in particular can play, whether they're working at local or regional levels or at state levels, to really focus on building regional or state level pathway systems that is really focused on the coalition of actors there. What is the infrastructure needed to sustain them over time? What are the systems that we need to have in place to design for scale? And how do we operationalize the work with tremendous intentionality and really aggregating the best of what we have to offer in any given context? I'm going to pause there because I think we're going to hear a lot more from our esteemed guests today. And to turn that over, I'm going to turn that over now to our moderator for the day and welcome our friend and colleague and supporter in the field, Isa Ellis, who is the Deputy Director of Education Pathways at the Gates Foundation. We've had the great privilege to partner with Isa on a number of pieces of work over time that has really served to provoke and scale the work of intermediaries in the field, including Building Equitable Pathways, an initiative and another Pathways initiative that we've been a part of, Launch Pathways. Isa, welcome you to the stage today. Thank you so much for joining to moderate this panel and this conversation today about the critical need and the functions of intermediaries.
Thank you, Kyle, for inviting me to join this session. And good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As Kyle mentioned, there's growing recognition and substantial support among educators, employers, and industry leaders, practitioners, and policymakers for a pathways-based approach to support the educational and career journey, aspirations, and success of learners. There's immense belief that together we need to help learners develop the skills, the agency, the social capital, and attain meaningful labor market aligned credentials to support them on their path to economic and social mobility. However, the Pathways movement is still relatively nascent, and there's an effort among key actors across sectors to develop a shared agenda, language, knowledge base, and shared goals. The good news, as Kyle mentioned, is that across the country, pathway intermediaries, organizations that sit at the intersection of K-12, post-secondaries, employers and industries, and youth-serving organizations are playing an increasingly critical role in leading the charge in designing, expanding, scaling quality pathways, and building bridges between education and career preparation, access, quality, and impact. These organizations champion a vision grounded in both evidence and an equity imperative. They center the learner experience and amplify practice and systems change efforts to improve outcomes for learners in dynamic and changing nature of local ecosystems. Today, I'm excited to share that we're joined by two intermediary leaders and experts who will share their practice, priorities, aspirations, and opportunities for creating better outcomes for learners in their regions. Angie Mason-Smith, Program Director of Washington STEM, and David Russ, Founder and CEO of Say Yes Buffalo. Angie and David, I invite you to tell us a bit about your organization and the work that you do. And Angie, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. I am honored to be here. I know that the intermediary work continues to grow nationwide and feel very honored to be in this space to kind of share our experience in Washington today. I'm Angie Mason-Smith, Program Director for Pathways to Credentials and Careers at Washington STEM. We go next slide. And Washington STEM is an education nonprofit that is leveraging STEM for social change, really understanding the gaps in access for students in hopes that we leave all students headed towards thriving in society. We are a cradle to career organization where we understand that early starts to early care is really important and starts as that foundational step. We often use the analogy that at that young age, we're hoping them grab the dexterity to be able to hold on to keys. And in the P12 STEM education, they're gaining keys and access and creativity and wanting to problem solve. And in the pathway work, we have those doors to open that lead to opening for many more opportunities. And we hope that no door leads to dead ends. And that is understanding that there are a variety of ways to earn credentials, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 4 year industry recognized credentials. But we know that that credential attainment is really important for success in our economy in Washington. And then how we do that work is through partnership, advocacy, and the data and evidence. And we often say we sit at the messy middle between those local level actors and gaining that evidence of what best practices are. And then we sit at the table with state level agencies that hold the levers of system change. So our role is really to provide that evidence and get that opportunity so that those who hold those levers understand how to pull them and we start to really shift and change. And we can go to the next slide. And that's really positioned us to be a longtime partner in the Career Connect Washington initiative that really is this desire to gain those opportunities for students to get career connected learning experience. It created a framework and a continuum for students to earn or to get career explore opportunities early and often, to learn to step into career prep, to be able to get that hands-on real experience, and get that paid work experience. And we know that what's really is really important is that students gain those stackable experiences. One-off opportunities aren't going to be those common steps that they need to really know that they see themselves in those careers and know how to engage in it. So we can go to next slide. Sharing a little here, I know this is a really busy slide with lots of logos, but it really does exemplify the complexity that Career Connect Washington is. It's really this statewide initiative where it was originally a governor's initiative. We're now having governor transition, and we've turned into a more permanent structure where we are a public-private partnership between 4 entities. And that's the Washington Achievement Council that really is in support of those agencies that have those levers and are doing that work. So our Office of our SBCTC and our career colleges, our public institutions, and it really brings that ecosystem together. Washington Roundtable is the employer partner, so they're really engaging employers in this work. And then Employment Security Department deploys our grants to build programs. And then we are the implementation partner. And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So Washington STEM holds that role to support more intermediaries in this space. So we talk about the complexity here of we are a statewide intermediary, but we also support local level intermediaries. So we have regional networks that are supporting this work with peer-connected learning coordinators that are really focused on that K-12 piece to build those alignments between K-12 and post-secondary institutions. We have statewide sector leads that are creating sector strategies in the key sectors in our state. And then we have program builders that are really building these programs and handing them off to long-term sustainability in the ecosystem. And so our role is to provide that technical assistance among all of those actors that are doing the implementing to help support that it's a cohesive way. And I really like what Kyle said. So it's not just pathways that exist because you're in a great opportunity and you have that, but that you're really creating these regional pathways that those opportunities become equal for all students in those regions. So that kind of gives an overview in a pretty quick way to give an overview of our ecosystem and how we are supporting that by bringing those folks together, creating common language and understanding, and really align to building those cohesive pathways for students.
Thank you so much, Angie. David, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Isa, and thanks, Angie. Great to follow you today and great to be with each of you today. So my name is Dave Rust. I'm the CEO with Say Yes Buffalo in beautiful Buffalo, New York. Happy to share a little bit about our intermediary work and talk a little bit how we got started. So I was the founder here of Say Yes Buffalo almost 14 years ago. We are an intermediary organization. We're best known for a scholarship promise. When we launched our work, we have a scholarship promise to every graduate of the public and charter schools here in Buffalo, New York, that they can earn a certificate, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, or an apprenticeship. Our students can attend any public college in New York State. They can also attend 100 private colleges around the country that we've entered into agreements and a compact with. So while the scholarship is what we're best known for, there's a couple other things that I think are really important to pull out here. First of all, we married our scholarship with comprehensive supports, and I'll talk about those shortly. I would call us an intermediary plus, given the work that we do employing 200 people, providing critical supports in our public schools and on our college campuses. And our theory when we launched our work was that stronger public schools would lead to increased post-secondary completion and ultimately economic revitalization of our city. We are a traditional Rust Belt community located on the west side of New York State. When we launched Say Yes, we were starting to rebound by many measurable accounts, but we were looking at a workforce cliff. We were looking at 170,000 open jobs in our region in the next decade, with 2/3 requiring a post-secondary credential. And the biggest opportunity, believe it or not, there are not 170,000 people that want to move to Buffalo. And we felt that all the young people in our city have tremendous potential. They just had all not been given opportunity. You know, similar to many cities like us, there is definitely a history of racial and economic segregation here. that's the problem. To me, what's more important is what's the solution. And we felt that our scholarship promise, married with comprehensive supports, would lead to, increased post-secondary completion and a stronger economy. So, we've asked people for their time, their money, their political will, and their resources, and it's leveraged tremendous outcomes here. So since we launched, our graduation rate was at 49%. Today it is at 79% in the city of Buffalo. Post-secondary entrance is up 25%, and post-secondary completion is up 18%. So we feel we've delivered in a meaningful way. There's a ton of work left to do, but those are tremendous system-wide gains, which are hard to make. I talk a lot about the economy when I do our work, and I think it's important that I hit on the economic gains of SAYS Buffalo as well, too. If we'd stayed at that 49% graduation rate, we would have 5,105 less graduates of our public schools. I mean, think about those beautiful, talented young people sitting on the sidelines from our economy. Their lifetime earnings based off, hyper-local Bureau of Labor data is $1.8 billion just by moving from, no high school to high school. We've also helped support 12,300 students enroll in post-secondary degrees, and their lifetime earning power based on a 60% four-year degree split, 40% two-year degree certificate apprenticeship split is $8.5 billion. So, this has absolutely been a game changer for young people in our community. I'll talk a little bit about how we're funded. So I raised about $30 million to fund scholarships for the first decade. We had decided if this worked, we were going to try to raise an endowment to have this secure forever for students in the city of Buffalo. We are closing in on a $65 million endowment campaign with a little under $3 million to go. And this scholarship promise will be here forever for children in the city of Buffalo. And we wanted this to be a generational investment focused on educational opportunity and access to a good job. While we were all doing all this, though, as important as the scholarship was, we just knew that if you needed proper food, clothing, shelter, access to extended learning time supports, mentoring and internships, that a scholarship wouldn't matter. A scholarship 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now simply wouldn't matter. So we went to work building this web of services and supports to complement the work happening in the Buffalo Public Schools and on our largest feeder institution campuses locally here in Buffalo. So when I say intermediary plus, we employ about 200 people. We are 70% people of color from senior leadership throughout our organization, committed to community, look like the individuals we serve. And our amazing team provides these supports. We do early childhood screening. We now lead the 3-year-old programming in our public schools with auto admit to UPK and kindergarten. We have social service and health case workers in every public school building. We have a satellite mental health clinic in every building. We offer legal clinics and health clinics. We have comprehensive summer camps for kids in pre-K through 6th grade across our community. We're the community schools provider here in Buffalo. Students transition over to pre-college and college. We have college and financial aid assistance. We have a mentoring program for young men of color. We have a transitional curriculum. Then we have apprenticeships and paid internships available for our students as well. And through a great partnership through the Buffalo College Success Network, we worked closely with Isa and her team on this. We were able to take many of the supports we had in our public schools and move them over to our higher ed campuses. 70% of our students are at schools 87% of our students are going to our local colleges and universities, many first in their family, and we wanted to support them with transportation, housing, supports they may need as needed. So we built this network of on-campus success counselors to directly support our scholars once they're on campus, because we don't want to plateau. We want to continue to push the post-secondary completion rates so that everyone can have a good job and contribute to our local economy. So again, a lot of work left to do. That's the nuts and bolts of the Say Yes story. The final thing I would note, and I don't have a slide on this, is, we do have an extensive intermediary network here with Say Yes Buffalo. We have a strong board of directors. Equally important, we have an advisory committee, and we continue to meet once a month to this day with our superintendent of our public schools, our county social services commissioner, a deputy mayor, 3 college presidents, our representative parent bodies, student voice. We've got state elected officials that contribute to our partnership with us, foundation leaders, union leadership. cabinet level leadership at our public schools and our Board of Education. And you just cannot do hard work alone, and nobody's in charge there. It's a partnership, and those were that was our agreed upon our metrics and unit of change. You saw, we agreed that we would try to raise the scholarship money from private sector if public sector would fund the services and supports that you see on the screen here. Our partners have been best in class, and they've always put this mission and access to opportunity above any individual institution. And I firmly believe that's how we've been able to drive the outcomes and metrics we have here on behalf of young people in the city of Buffalo.
Thank you so much for that, David. Thank you both, Angie and David, for providing some background and insight into the work that you do in your organization, including your origin story. So super helpful. So I will say you both said a lot, right, in terms of the work of intermediaries. And a couple of things that I heard: all students have tremendous potential, but are not given an opportunity. Also heard that you cannot do the hard work alone. And we think about the hard work. You all brought up a couple of different things. So the work of intermediaries includes partnership, advocacy, evidence building, capacity building, program development, talent development, supporting the economic viability of your region. So that's a lot of work and a lot of different efforts. I'd love if you both can just share in either order, and David, you can start, and Angie, if you don't mind following, is what is the specific unique role of intermediaries? Because you've just covered a lot of ground. And so if you can speak to, like, what are the very specific things, one or two things that you do that differentiates yourself from others working in your ecosystem?
Thanks, Isa. Happy to go first on this. So there's a couple of things that I would frame up as our role and responsibility here as an intermediary focused on Buffalo, New York. I would also note too, we are in the process of expansion and moving into Niagara Falls, which is really encompasses two large counties here in the Western New York area. So I would start with the fact that we feel that we need to be a convener and a facilitator. That is the initial role that we play in bringing together time, talent, and resources, and the financial resources to meet our big goals of more high school graduates, more post-secondary graduates, and a thriving workforce. With that comes data collection. That is the second component that I would point to. Is we collect data both at a systems level, as some of it that I had shared. We also collect data at a program level. I just believe if you're going to ask people for their time, their talent, their political will, that you have to show that you're delivering on it. We never wanted to be a slow, clunky nonprofit here. We wanted to be very effective, and we felt that if we were going to be able to, meet the big goals that we were putting forward, that everything we did had to be measured and shared. The third role that I would speak to is really around the sustainability of our work. I would point to both the scholarships and the services. We were pretty used to 3-year grant cycles here in Western New York. And, there's been pockets of greatness in Buffalo for a long time providing services. We need those. We need those to continue to stay here, but we needed scholarships and services that would be here, long term. So we would provide the sustainability for the scholarship and also the services. And then the fourth part is where we became Intermediary Plus. And that was, I guess, the services and the scholarship provider. I touched on, there were just too many barriers in way that were preventing young people from graduating high school and earning post-secondary programs. And we felt our strategy needed to include services as well as the scholarship. We don't always provide services. I would use we do what we do best and partner on the rest is the way I would frame it. With the mental health clinics available on all of our college campuses and in our public schools, there's 10 or 11 great behavioral health agencies here. We didn't need to hire a ton of clinicians to do that work. We felt our role there was to provide seed funding, data collection, and as the clinicians start each year in the school, ensuring that they had additional capital needed until it could be, they had a caseload that would sustain themselves through private pay or their health insurance. So again, everything we did, we tried to take that frame on it. For community schools, we felt it was important that we were the leader on that and that we were actually ran and delivered the programming in the public schools. So those are the 4 intermediary roles that we focused on. We reaffirm those every time we have a strategic plan, and I don't anticipate them to change. That's really worked for us.
Angie?
Yeah, thank you. I kind of echo some of what David said there. I think a big piece of it is that the convening and bringing folks together and getting folks to talk about some of the real issues, allowing for that hyper local focus, because we know that's a real priority in our state with a lot of local control, but also what are themes and things that we hear in a variety of communities that we can then elevate to better practices or policy changes. What are things that we hear in, with barriers to access in rural communities? Where are there bright spots that we can bring and elevate? So it's really bringing those partnerships and places together and being that kind of that middle advocate for folks. I'll use an example. We know that there's a lot of community-based organizations in our community that have the real trusted relationships with a lot of the communities that we desire to serve. We also know that many of them have not felt that they have access to program builder grants and opportunities, having a grant writer, the time and capacity to do those things. And that creates a barrier. And so we took a significant amount of that evidence and worked with our equity advisory network to provide some recommendations to our other partner, the Employment Security Department, to say, hey, this is a barrier where a lot of these programs are funded based on reimbursement allocations, and that's hard for small community-based organizations. And so we worked with Employment Security Department. They were able to change their practices, and so now programs are able to get 20% of their grant up front, and that has then created more access for more organizations to engage and be a part of it, right? And so we provide that middleman service, a little of hearing what's happening at those local levels and supporting that for advocacy, and then bringing those partners to continue together. And then additionally, obviously, is the data piece and component, right? We're right now, we've had about 16,000 since 2019 of career launch, including apprenticeship students in our state, which is awesome. But we also know that we haven't had a measurement at Career Prep and Career Explore. So we haven't been able to tell the whole story of the funnel of getting kids engaged in these programs to be able to build on that, right? So we are now working to identify what is that common measurable place so that we can actually tell that story better. So we continue to reiterate and work with our agencies and partners in the data to be able to build that so that we continue to build programs that fit into the gaps in the system, that align with student aspirations and fit the economic needs of our business. And we feel that kind of that intermediary piece.
Thank you both for that. I mean, Angie, this was a really good setup because where I want to go next is really around the data piece and get really a bit more specific and granular around that, and data and impact. And so when we think about data, you're leveraging data to understand the who and the what of the work. And considering that this work involves a lot of different partners and a lot of collaboration, couple of questions for you. And Angie, love to start with you because since you were going down that path, and then David, if you don't mind following up. So first, we want to know, like, what data are you looking at? What's the source of your data? So it'd be, where's the data coming from? Would be really helpful. And how are you bringing your partners together in service of looking at that data, understanding the data, and then making decisions around that data to inform the design, the delivery, and evaluation of your pathways?
Yeah, that's a great question. We talk about this a lot because I think at times when we're talking about, the impact of Career Connect Washington in general and or of our work, we oftentimes get stuck in what data is hard to get a hold of at a state level, right? And so it doesn't always tell the impact of the stories and the impact in individual communities, right? And it often tells the story of what can sometimes be a broken data system, and that's hard, right? We sit in a role to bring, our K-12 data together along with our post-secondary data to help figure out where are those pathways that students are able to obtain and map to that. And we haven't been able, like I said, to be able to map cohesively in regions where those programs are. And what has then created where we've just continued to grow programs. And so now the shift is more to the intentionality on how do we fund and programs that fit that are missing in the system. So we know that maybe there is an employer that is really eager and interested and a demand in a region. What are those pathways of programs that align to it? And we've had to come up with and bring those data together and then help elevate to the state where there is missing gaps in the data and what they can get at the local level, what economic data do we bring, and we convene folks to really talk about the data in different sectors, because it looks different in different sectors in different regions, to look at it as statewide, and to look at those gaps that continue to exist, especially in our smaller rural communities that have more of education and employer deserts, right? To be able to build that, to create those solutions. So the data isn't always, we bring kind of the data together to be able to look at it across the system.
Thanks, Angie. So I'll hit on some data both at a macro level and then a programmatic level. And I saw one of the questions in the chat earlier. So our K-12 data comes from the New York State Education Department, which is the validated data source at the state level. I think if anybody is interested in very hyper-local Buffalo Public Schools data, we built the data dashboard for the public schools. It's available at their website. It's built in Power BI, and that really helps individuals, drill it down to a district lens, but also you can go down to individual student level if that's of interest. It was a great partnership for us. When it comes to our higher ed data, we have a contract with the National Student Clearinghouse, and we also have the macro level data that the school district provides us from the National Student Clearinghouse. So those ultimately become our two, I guess, vetted data sources that we're able to pull our systems level data from. Within all of our programs, we have logic models, we have data availability checklists, and there's further iterations we can do in our work. We're still at a point of trying to understand. Like I can tell you at a program level, once a student attends 3 of our community school Saturdays, the academic scores go up, school attendance goes up, and school discipline referrals drop. We would love to get to a point of being able to marry that with other services within Say Yes to see what's happening from a dosage perspective. But again, we've got good systems level data, both at the public schools and from post-secondary completion. Our economic data comes from, we brought in a think tank out of DC to run the economic story for us at Say Yes Buffalo. It uses those 2 same data sources I shared, married with wage attainment data at the county level, so that we're able to show the economic gains of our work, which I think is really critical. At the end of the day, there's people being left out of our economy in multiple markets, and we wanted to show the economic data and gains because I think that's critical to continue to tell and frame up the Say Yes economic story. Again, there's more we can do there too, though. We're interested in a comprehensive early warning system for students that are in post-secondary programs. We don't want to plateau, and we want to continue to serve our students effectively. So we'll continue to try to, push and grow our data capacity so that we can, not plateau and be a really effective intermediary long-term in Western New York.
Thank you both for that. And I will just emphasize one of the things that we've learned about this work is that data capacity is one of the areas of development for intermediaries across the board and across the country. So building their capacity not only to collect and use and leverage data to make decisions, but also knowing how to partner with K-12 employers, so on and so forth, so that collectively everyone has access to the latest, greatest data dashboards to make informed decisions, to inform their partnership and to inform the work that they're doing. So we do know that that's a area of development and opportunity in the intermediary space. So I actually want to shift to funding, but before I do that, I just want to share with everyone, encourage you to post your questions and your comments in the chat. I also want to encourage you. Kyle has been posting a number of different resources to learn more about Say Yes and as well as Washington STEM, but also other resources that JFF, Kyle and team have developed, curated over the years related to data, related to the work and functions of intermediaries. So I encourage you to copy and paste those resources so you have access to them after this conversation. So I'd like to transition to funding and then want to close out the section a bit and then want to open it up for questions, if that's okay with the 2 of you. And so the funding piece. So a couple of things. So when intermediaries launch, we know that about 70% of them are highly dependent on philanthropic funding, right? Because they're new organizations catalyzing new work, doing something different. And that's often what philanthropy wants to invest in, something new, something innovative, something super interesting. However, over time, we know that's not sustainable. Just depending on philanthropic dollars, other dollars, public dollars specifically, are needed to sustain the work, and not just the operations of an intermediary, but the work of developing, designing, expanding, scaling pathways in a region. And so I'd love to hear from you how you think about your funding, and also how you've blended public and private dollars over the years in support of building a healthy and thriving pathway ecosystem.
Great, I can kick that off. So I guess broadly, I do feel that philanthropic dollars are most effective and best used when there's seed capital that can be sustained elsewhere. So if I was going to break Say Yes Buffalo into two cost centers, I guess one would be scholarships. The second cost center would be services and operations and everything else we do. I'll start with scholarships. We've raised, between our initial 10-year fund and our endowment, we've raised a little bit above $90 million. 70 million of that has come from private sector, so businesses, individuals, and foundations, largely from Western New York. The state came forward with a $20 million investment, cut across 2 different budget cycles to essentially close that endowment campaign and finish it. So the private capital came first. The state made a final investment with economic development dollars to close the endowment campaign so that it's here long term. On the service side, much of it is flipped there. So our budget this year on the program op side, we have a $20.5 million budget, $3.5 million of that is scholarships. The remaining 17 is around programs and services. About 75% of that is publicly funded at this point in time, largely coming from our public schools, our county, our city, and some Medicaid dollars that fund some health programming that we run. I did have seed capital that kicked that off as well too, but the goal was that public sector would eventually step into that. So again, on the program side now, it's about 75% publicly funded. We generally have some philanthropic grants coming in on the program side. Our big goal is that we don't launch something unless we have a path to sustainability on the back end. We continue to grow and innovate. I know later I want to talk a little bit on workforce and the apprenticeship work we're doing, but just from a funding perspective, that's the model we've taken. I would say the nice thing is we need other intermediaries in Buffalo connected around workforce, around housing, our regional economy. We have other challenges. The beauty of this endowment campaign is we don't have to go back to our private sector again when it's done. We are off that hamster wheel, and it's an asset that's here. It'll be here 100 years from now supporting children. It's an incredible investment. So not to say it's easy, that's a big number in Buffalo, but it was the right approach for us to keep us funded and sustained long term. Maybe I'll have one final comment. I mentioned how we've grown. The growth, for the contract work we do on the services we run, we do have management and general fees on that. They're generally in the 15% range. That changes year by year by us spending what our operations look like. But that has allowed us to not have to fundraise for the intermediary function. We use that to fund the convening and facility we do. It's essentially our time and some food. It's not super expensive to do that, but it's really important. And that's why the growth and the program work proved to be really essential for us to stand up the intermediary function and not have to be fundraising for that long term.
Angie?
Yeah, and then for Career Connect Washington, it started with a significant amount of philanthropy support to really kind of seed and kick off. And then the state, between state and federal funding to really support the program building piece. We've now shifted, this is the second year that has been mostly shifted out of philanthropy into state appropriations and into the state budget. We are currently in a transition between governors and is starting off as a governor mission, trying to through this legislative session, withstand and sustain those dollars. But the majority of it does support the different intermediaries but the majority of it does go to program builder dollars and has been the combination of both state and federal funding. That has been the big bulk of that at about 20 million appropriations for that. Over that time. And then we've also, due to it, have secured other federal funding, like our work getting the Good Jobs Challenge funding, an additional 23 million into building some of those pathways in additional sectors to good jobs. So it has also allowed us to position ourselves for other federal funding to expand on the work over time. But I agree with David in that, that it's really important to have that investment and commitment from the state as we, really keep that sustainable model in place.
Thank you both. So what's so interesting about what you've both shared is that you launched thinking about sustainability. So it's not something that happened over time. So as you were launching the work that you were doing, whether it's in Washington or Buffalo, you were thinking about not only what do we need now, but what do we need in the long term. And that's actually something that differentiates intermediaries from a number of different nonprofits, is because intermediaries are really thinking. In some cases, intermediaries may exist in perpetuity, but in a lot of cases, intermediaries do work themselves out of business because they're ultimately trying to create the systems change so that the system actors such as K-12 employers or post-secondary entities can take on responsibilities, behave differently, and rethink how they allocate and or deploy their dollars in creating cross-spanning solutions as opposed to isolated solutions. So I think it's just really interesting how you both talk about your work and how you think about sustainability, because it's about the public sector not only owning the work, but paying for the work over time and making this a core priority of how they operate. So I want to just end with this last question, and we'd love to just open it up for Q&A and questions. Love to hear from all of you. And again, thank you for participating in the chat and encourage more comments and questions. So, and Angie, I'll start with you if that's okay. This is the last question is, you've just shared a lot about the work of Washington STEM, Career Connect Washington, how you originated, the work that you're doing now, and even you've tiptoed into like how you all have evolved and are evolving. The same thing with you, David, with Say Yes Buffalo. So for the audience, would love if you can share what is one action that state and or regional education and workforce leaders can take right now to support the work of intermediaries.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is I think in our state, we have a lot of great policies. We actually have a significant amount of resources, and I think that the more and more we continue to de-silo the work being done and work collectively is really what's needed. And when you think about all the way down to the participant level as they're trying to navigate their own career and opportunities. So as we continue to, there's, dedicated funding to, increase the high school to post-secondary gap and understand advising. But if there aren't pathways to advise to, what are we advising them to, right? And vice versa. We can't, if you build it, they will come, and pathways doesn't always exist, right? And so really doing that work intentionally together. And I think it is what puts Washington STEM in a unique position in supporting a variety of these initiatives in the state, that it becomes hyper-focused, that it is our job to work with funders and partners and making sure that we don't create more undue silos that make it just harder and harder for those participants. A student doesn't need to know who funded their money or where it came from. They need to know they have these opportunities and that they have trusted adults in the system that can help them navigate the way. Right. And so we trying to get rid of the other noise and chaos that prohibits, I think, is something that we could really all focus on doing.
Thanks, Angie. I hear you on silos loud and clear, and that's the role of intermediaries, to bring people together, right? So this work didn't happen overnight and takes patient capital. It took us 9 years to get Say Yes Buffalo fully sustained. We're just finishing up this intermediary campaign. So I would encourage local civic leaders, philanthropy, government leaders to make a long-term commitment to an intermediary. know what you want to measure, what matters, and how do you measure it. I think we were clear about that. And think big and go for it. You've got to think big in this work. You've got to think long term. It outlasts, many government leaders, and we've had great partners throughout the way. But like, for example, we wouldn't have gotten off the ground here without the scholarship. That was our North Star. That was our carrot that brought everybody together. I think we can all point to our education, whether it's a certificate, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, is fundamental to our success in our life and important to us. That was something that all our partners agreed on, and we decided we were going to go raise the money for it. If we did a feasibility study, it would have come back, no, don't do it. So think big and go for it, and make a long-term commitment with patient capital to the work. And then I would note that allows you to innovate and evolve along the way. And I will touch on that because I want to hit workforce a bit in the Q&As, but I'll pause for a second so we can get to those. Isa?
Thank you both. So a couple of things I just want to hit on quickly, and then I want to pass it back to Kyle, who's going to facilitate the Q&A. So one, doing the work together intentionally. You cannot do the hard work alone, and the work takes patience capital. So 3 things just to keep in mind as you all are thinking about entering this space, or you're doing the space and you're not feeling as motivated, but you have 2 leaders and you have JFF who are all in to support you, inspire you, and encourage you as you're doing this work along the way. And there's lots of supports online. I cannot encourage you enough. There's a lot of resources on the JFF website. So Kyle, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you. I was just putting a quick piece of goodness in the chat there. Yes, there is lots of information out there. I've tried to put a few pieces into the chat. There's a lot more. It's hard to kind of capture and synthesize. Just as a quick note, I was responding to a question that Carol had asked about how and whether intermediaries have a chance to come together and learn. And I did share back a little bit about building equitable pathways, which is an initiative that is currently sunsetted, but there are other ones happening. There's Launch, there is Accelerate Ed. There are other initiatives that are happening across the country. Pathways to Prosperity and our partners in this coalition are most often convening with and or through intermediary organizations. And I don't think we're doing it enough, right? Like, we're still in danger of leaving good learning on the table. And by good learning, I mean not just best practices, but things that people have tried and we have found have not been successful or not worked. And we need to be really intentional about interrogating those and examining what's the after action look at that so that we don't recreate those mistakes in other contexts. I know we only have a few more minutes here. Dave or Angie, I don't know if you've been scanning the chat. There's a number of questions that have been popping up. Dave, I know you chatted me a second ago. Was there a question in here that really stood out to you that you thought might be worth giving a voiceover to? And then Angie would love to maybe grab one that was maybe directed a little bit toward some of the work happening in Washington.
I do, yeah. Thanks, Kyle. I thought there's 1 or 2 I can hit on. The experience in getting information from local employers about current and future job openings. I'll take a minute on this because we've partnered with the CareerWise Network to offer apprenticeships. We also offer other workforce pathways for our students that don't take on our traditional scholarship. It was an important move for us. SAIS has always been about access for everyone and choice. Choice meaning if you want to get a quick certificate in phlebotomy, we'll fund that. If you want to go 2-year mechanical engineering, we'll fund that. If you want to go 4-year accounting and finance, we'll fund that. We have 2,400 students on scholarship right now, 61% with family income below $50,000 and 31% below $25,000. There are students that free college is simply too expensive for. And we felt that we really needed to add an apprenticeship and workforce pathway at a minimum that led to mid-skill, mid-wage opportunities. If we're really about choice, we needed that 4th pathway available for us. And we've doubled down on that through quicker pathways that are less formal than apprenticeship is into our pathway. But one of the critical things for us was we wanted to understand wage attainment for our scholars, and we also wanted to get data on current and future job openings. So Invest Buffalo Niagara is a local entity that works to recruit partners to the region, employers in particular. They've got some really strong data using Lightcast on job openings projected forward. They also just funded a labor market assessment, and they've traditionally done that every 5 years, Richard. That labor market assessment takes a good look at the jobs that are available now and what we can project in 5 years. That helps us educate our scholars on the jobs that will be available. It also helps us recruit workforce and apprenticeship placements for young people. So those have been really critical tools for us. I mean, sometimes the data is so good that they know more than our employers do when we go in the room, given how there can be silos there too. So they've been really helpful tools for us, Richard. And again, that's Invest Buffalo Niagara. If you look up the labor market assessment, it's available right on their website if you're looking for something similar in your community, and Lightcast is the other tool.
I think I can add a little to that too with Career Connect Washington. That's been the advantage of having sector leads as additional intermediaries in this space. They're working specifically with employers in their sector to identify what are those key jobs that we should really be focusing on then. It also allows us to have those relationships with employers, because if we start to say that, hey, you don't need a 4-year degree, you can get these different credentials or do this apprenticeship, are we also working with employers to ensure that they are addressing their hiring practices, right? Because we don't want to set kids up to say, hey, these credentials are what you need, but then they're still hiring from a 4-year institution every time, regardless if that's the skill that's needed. So we're doing really the work on both sides to be able to work with industry specifically and identify those. And you can see on the Career Connect Washington website, each sector has sector strategies, and each region has regional strategies, both defined by data and unique jobs. So you can see specifically where those gaps are and how to start to align to those.
Thank you both for that. I'm tracking back a little bit through the chat, but also welcome if there's somebody who wants to open up their microphone and ask anyone on the panel additional question about their work or their position or thinking on the work of intermediaries, their imperative.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Hi, Joe Harity here from live in San Jose. The question that is occurring to me is that in some elements of what's just been described, are sort of is positioned as work of workforce development boards, and so I'd be curious how both folks in Washington and Buffalo are partnering with workforce boards and local workforce boards. Thinking about some of the labor market information, where the sector relationships are being developed, if and how workforce boards are seen as partners in the ecosystem you're cultivating.
I'm happy to respond to that. I will say that was a point of tension early on, acknowledging that some of these efforts do feel duplicative of some of the other roles in the system. And there was some harm done in that. And we've spent time over the last couple of years of putting a arm's reach out back to that and building those relationships back in. And so now we have many of the local workforce boards join our convenings and are partnering in their local regions. We're trying to help people see the mindset of a region's plan is the region's plan, and it's not the regional director's plan as an individual, right? And so really allowing for all of those pieces to work together helps build a bigger ecosystem. And since then, we've had 4 of our local workforce boards are also backbones in the sectoral partnerships for the WJI work. So we have done a significant amount of work of bridging that back, because that's what I talk about at the de-siloing, right? Like there's enough room for all of us in this space, and how do we collectively work together to create those opportunities and leverage funds, right? We have the opportunity to fund things in different ways. So how we leverage that funding to create more opportunities in those regions.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And Angie, thanks for hopping in on that. We're really approaching the end of this piece. I just want to flag Richard's question in here around, and maybe this could be like a quick final word moment. And I have a couple more points before we close out. This question on how do you think about the work of facilitating the development and the support of people building additional types and forms of social and professional capital through the work of intermediaries? Like how are you looking at that?
I go back to where I opened this, and it's around young people have potential, not always given opportunity. And I think Richard hits right on that. Buffalo is definitely a who do you know town. And we had found that just because students were getting degrees, it didn't necessarily mean they were getting a job. And I think, we ran wage attainment data, and it showed there was a wage gap for our students earning 2-year degrees and 4-year degrees compared to the suburban students. And when you can run data like that and you're effective in telling your story and raising resources, it allows you to grow and innovate, and that directly led to an internship program for our scholars at, earning strong private sector internships and jobs. And it led to the development of our workforce portfolio. So it's on us to track data and I think to adjust accordingly and continue to innovate to meet the ever evolving needs of young people and families. I think there is no more critical work that can be done anywhere in our country, rural and urban, around access to a good paying job. And when we can do that, a lot of other challenges go away. So these are, beautiful, talented students we're all trying to help, and we can help them in many ways. But I think the work we've talked about today is critical to the long-term health and vitality of our cities, our communities, and our country.
Thanks for that. Angie, Isa, any words you want to add to that?
No, and I just go back to like student voice and amplifying when we're building these programs, co-designing with them and addressing our own adult bias that we place. I think a lot of times we have a perceived of what students should do or could do. And so I think we need to break some of those biases.
For sure.
My only addition is that the work of philanthropy, a part of the work of philanthropy, is to help to convene, help to connect the dots, and help to amplify the good stories of who's doing what well. So as you hear the story about Washington STEM and you hear the work of Say Yes Buffalo, we think there are about 190 to 200 organizations across the country that are just like them doing this work and trying to get smarter and more strategic about the work. So when I think about building social capital, and this work is also connecting smart people to other smart people, strategic people to other strategic people who are wanting to learn from each other, learn fast, so that they can do the work better, smarter, and more intentional in the places that they work.
Well, thank you all for this. Courtney's going to bring up one final slide. Dave, Isa, Angie, thank you so much for the generosity of your time and your thinking and contributing to this conversation today. It's a real honor and privilege for us to be able to partner and work with you. Thanks for joining this conversation. And thank you all for joining us today for this. A couple of quick things here. There's some information in the chat.